Let's talk about dimensions. And by dimensions, I don't mean what mathematicians refer to as hyperspace, like 4D, tetrahedron, warping hyperspace into 5D. That's not what I mean. Forget that. Yes, you can create these mathematical realities, but that's not how life behaves. Life has separated the different dimensional levels in the same way musical notes are separated. I will show you. So if you look at a piano, you have white keys and black keys. White keys are whole notes and black keys are half steps. Now from C to C is an octave, and each octave is made of 12 notes. C and C are the same note, but this C has a higher pitch. Pitch is how high or low the frequency of a sound is, basically cycles per second. Now the difference between the notes are 11 cycles per second, or multiples of them. So they're always 11, 22, 33, 44. And now it's time for a short physics lesson. I am your inner child's worst nightmare. In terms of either sound or light, there's something called a wavelength. You have your axis, and then you have your sine wave curve, which we are all familiar with, which really is a function of a circle. If you have a circle and you cut it in half and then you flip, you then have a sine wave curve. Now, if you were to measure this line going down the middle, or from any of the nodal points to another nodal point, this length is called the wavelength. Wavelength is everything in this universe. There isn't anything that isn't a function of wavelength. And if you look at the electromagnetic spectrum, you'll notice that from radio waves to microwaves to infrared to visible light to ultraviolet, everything is a function of how long the wavelength is. Now, if you change the wavelength, you change the nature of what the energy is. Some wavelengths are short, some wavelengths are very long. Your brain waves, the waves coming out of your brain, the wavelengths are so long that they're almost straight lines. You have something like infrasound, which is below 20 hertz, and this is imperceptible. Then you have cosmic waves, which are like 10 to the power minus 18 or something. So small, you can't even see them. If you were to look at the different dimensional levels, the only difference between this universe, the Sun, Mercury, and Venus, and Earth, Mars, Jupiter, and then if you were to go down to the subatomic particle, there are 3 different basic levels in this universe. And this constitutes one wavelength. Now, without going into much detail, the wavelength of this universe was discovered by Bell Laboratories, and it's 7.23 centimeters long. Now, the curious thing about the number 7.23 centimeters, it is that it is the average distance between your eyes. All life forms have this number shuffled throughout their system. And you can even communicate this from a quantum mechanic point of view. So in quantum physics, you can look at this pen as made up of tiny particles or made up of sound. There's something very specific. It's called sine wave signature. There could be something that could look like this, or there could be something like this, like this. Every physical object in the universe has its own signature, its own sound wave signature. It's a language. In fact, people believe that if you can absolutely create the signature, you can create the object. And if you compute the average of all the sounds coming from the universe, the number will be 7.23. If you think about it, 7.2 is actually quite short. Like I said, it's the distance between 2 eyes. But you know what else has a wavelength of 7.23? Om. As the Tibetans and Hindus say, the sound of the universe, the sound of all things at one moment. Where does consciousness come into play? In terms of looking at the dimensional levels, there are 144 dimensional levels that are in the octaves. So again, looking at music, we have 12 notes. And then you have your 13th note, which is the return or the start of the next octave. Between each of these 12 notes, you have 12 overtones that basically approximate the larger one, which are holographic in nature. Something to understand is that sound or electromagnetic light is holographic in nature. You can go within in the same way you can go, for example, into this table at a particular point. This whole octave becomes a note relative to another octave above this one. Because there's 12 notes and 12 overtones, you have 12 times 12 equals 144 dimensions. But you have 12 primary ones. And these are what you might call in Star Trek subspace. They are real worlds, they're just as infinite. They just aren't whole note universes, but they're just as important. Where are we? We are on the third note. This is the dimension our consciousness is tuned to. And again, I am not referring to the XYZ axis, with the fourth dimension being time. Forget about that. We are sitting on the third note of this octave. We are breathing in a very specific way that tunes us to this wavelength. If you are capable of changing your breathing and tuning your consciousness to a different wavelength, then everything will change. You would no longer exist in this dimensional level. And this is actually the study of Merkaba. Today it's one word, but actually it's three words. Mer-ka-ba. Mer is light, but a very specific kind of light. It's a counter-rotating field of light. Ka means spirit in almost all ancient languages. And ba, in Hebrew it's va, it means body. Or reality even, because the higher you go, the less matter really plays a role in this relationship. So let me make 2 points clear. The higher the dimension, the shorter the wavelength. We are at the lowest possible consciousness level while still being self-aware. You also have an octave below and an octave above that have a specific relationship with each other. But once you know the wavelength, once you calculate the music of this octave, it's very easy to calculate the wavelengths of all the others. Now, between each universe, there's a void. And there are different kinds of voids, but we're not going to get into that.